taking your Bibles, go with me to Leviticus chapter 26. Leviticus chapter 26 for just a moment. We'll come back to this as well in a few moments, but I want to look at a particular verse. Look at Leviticus 26, verse 21. Leviticus 26, verse 21. Leviticus chapter 26, verse 21. I'm going to tie this in with what we were talking about last week. He says, verse 21, "Then," this is God speaking, "if you walk contrary to me and are not willing to obey me, I will bring on you 7 times more plagues according to your sins. I will also send wild beasts among you, which shall rob you of your children, destroy your livestock, and make you few in number, and your highways shall be desolate." Now go with me to 2 Kings chapter 2. The context here is that Elijah has just been taken up in a chariot. The Spirit of the Lord has now fallen upon Elisha. And verse 23, we pick it up, and here's the text. "Then he went up from there," this is speaking of Elisha, "then he went up from there to Bethel. And as he was going up on the road," notice the highway, "some youths came up from the city and mocked him and said to him, 'Go up, you bald head, go up, you bald head.' So he turned around and looked at them and pronounced a curse on them in the name of the Lord. And 2 female bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the youths." 42 of them. "Then he went from there to Mount Carmel, and from there he returned to Samaria." Where did he get the idea that if he were to call these bears out of the woods, that they would come out, and he does this in the name of the Lord? I suspicion that he has read Leviticus chapter 26. Let's go back and read Leviticus 26 again. Look what it says. Verse 22, "I will also send wild beasts among you, which shall rob you of your children, destroy your livestock, and make you few in number." But verse 21 is the precursor. "If you walk contrary to me and are not willing to obey me." So what happens? These youths, which I said last week were really probably older than just children. Some of your translations like to say children. They're probably older than just mere children. And they say, "Go up." They've just seen Elijah go up. So saying, "You take off too. You go up." And then bald head is a term of derision. Because if you lose your hair, it was thought in terms of having your hair shaved, which shaving your hair was a sign of mourning, a sign of having been humiliated. Enemies would take somebody they captured and they would shave their heads. You remember there's a case where David's men are captured and they shave off half their beard. And David says, "Go stay away from the city for a while until everything grows out." So this kind of, it was a way of mocking. So they're saying, "Go up." That is, you take off too. You go wherever Elijah went. Bald head, term of derision. And Elisha says, he calls down a curse, the text says, and 2 she-bears come out of the woods and take on 42 of these youths and destroy them. But he's calling on Leviticus 26. You have to know the Torah portion in order to appreciate what's going on here. Everything is connected. It's all connected. We just have to figure out the connection. Okay? But he's calling down this curse. Now, any questions on that? On what's going on here? The she-bears is in 2 Kings 2, verse 24. Yeah, 2 Kings 2:24. That's where you get the 2 female bears. They come out of the woods and just 42. Now, I got to believe that if there's 42 of them, these bears must have tracked them down, because you would think with 42 of them, I'm just thinking out loud here, if you would think with 42 of them, that two bears would have to trace after. I mean, okay, so the one is attacking, let's say one bear attacks two people because they're in close proximity. That's 4. But this says there's 42 of them. So I got to think that some of these youths started running, and yet the bears are still able to track them down. Kind of says something about the ferocity of this event. Yes? Yeah, 42 of the... Huh? Yeah. We don't know how many were there. At least they got 42 of them. That must have sent a message, that, messing with this prophet is not a good idea. I mean, if he calls... But notice what he does. He can't control 2 she-bears, obviously. So what does he do? Knowing the promise, here's the key. Knowing what God had said and the promise, he calls upon God and says, "Oh Lord, you said you would do this. This is the curse that you said would come upon our people if we walk contrary to your ways. I think these people are contrary to your ways. So I'm asking you to bring out wild beasts, as you said you would, and destroy them." And God says, I think the prophet's right.
So the prophet has judgment?
Yes. Well, he believed that the people that were attacking him were in the category that Leviticus 26 established. And he says, God, based on what you said, bring out these animals and destroy these ones who are mocking. Now, if he was wrong, I have to believe that God would not have done it, because it was up to God to send the bears. God taps 2 she-bears and says, head on out. He's got control of nature. Like he says in Leviticus 26, it's an empty threat if he has no control of them. He says, I'll bring wild animals out and they will do my bidding. Why should we be surprised at that? Yes. No. No. Not 42. I mean, you'd think after 2 or 3 they'd be full. I mean, if one, one good size, they'd be like, okay, we're satisfied. Yes, but the fact that 42 tells you that this is God-driven, and he calls down a curse. So this gives you understanding, I hope, for the imprecatory Psalms. Why that they can call upon God to bring destruction. If the psalmist believes that a person has placed themselves in a category that brings judgment from God, then they're asking for God to do the same things that he said he would. My point is this. If we have these promises from God, that he said he will do these things, then are we able to tap into those promises and ask him to be faithful to his word? And it seems that the answer to that is yes. Yes. Yeah, it happens. I think that God can do that. Yeah, I think God can do that very type of thing. Well, my point is this. I suspicion there's a lot of promises we haven't tapped into. That there's a lot of things God has said he would do for his people, that he has made the promise, and we have not tapped into those promises. We don't really know them, and because we don't know them, we don't even know to pray for them. And we have not, God says, because we ask not. We don't even know what to ask for. So we're going to go over some of that today. Go with me back to chapter 25. We're going to go to Leviticus 26 in just a moment, but go with me back to Leviticus chapter 25. I'm become more and more convinced that the reason why God gives us certain things to do is to prepare us and teach us for things that are coming down the road. Let me give you an example of that. in our text. Did you catch it in verse 9 of chapter 25? He says, then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee, which, by the way, the word Yovel means ram's horn, to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, which is the Day of Atonement. On the Day of Atonement you shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all your land, and you shall consecrate the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. And each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you shall return to his family, that the 50th year shall be a jubilee to you. Okay, so, for instance, now think about this. We have this cycle of 50 years. Here's the rehearsal for that. The rehearsal for that is that every year after Passover, we count 49 days leading up to Shavuot. He gives us a little, we count 50 days. We get the Pentecost, 50, or Shavuot, weeks. So every year, we do a little mini rehearsal of this counting of the 50 that leads us to the ultimate counting of 50, which is the 50 years. So he's doing this as a way of saying to us, don't forget, every year you're going to kind of mimic this, and you're going to kind of rehearse this in preparation for what's coming in the 50th year, which on the Day of Atonement, there'll be this Yovel. Everything will go back. My point is that God is doing things in us and through us to prepare us for the things in the future. He's always doing this. So it's this rehearsal for the future, okay? That God is always preparing it. Now go back and look at chapter 25. Look at verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I have given you, the land shall keep the Sabbath to the Lord. The land has to keep a Sabbath. So the weekly Sabbath is to get you in condition to think in terms of the Sabbath of the land. That every seventh day you're going to stop working, because every seventh year you're going to stop working. No, they were not supposed to alternate fields. That was a good question. It was supposed to be an absolute ceasing from all. Didn't matter when you had planted them. They were supposed to be on a rotation of 7, and every 7th year you let it go fallow throughout all the land. Now here's what he says to them. Huh? You can still eat from it. Here they can't plant or harvest. He does say to them that they can go, any growth that comes up, they can benefit from. They can go into the field and take from it. Strangers can go and take from it. So what happens is, basically here's what he's saying. Every 7th year the land kind of goes back to me. It's kind of as if it's mine, because it really is mine all along anyway. You don't get anything from it unless I give it to you. If I don't bring out the sun and I don't send the rain, you don't have anything to begin with. So every 7th year, let the land lie fallow. And here's what's going to happen. When you do that, I'll make bumper crops in the years before that so that you'll have plenty. You can store some away. And you can still go into the land. You can still go into your fields during the 7th year. You can only take enough for your immediate meal. You can't go in there and harvest it. Okay? Not allowed to go in there and harvest it, but you are allowed to go get your immediate meal. And anybody that wants to, by the way, the sojourner, the foreigner, they can come on your land and take as much as they want. You can't stop them. You're not supposed to. We find out later on they did. We find out later on they're neglecting this whole 7th year. They're thinking to themselves, you kidding me? Stop after the 7th year? You got to be crazy. We got a bumper crop coming in. We can have more food, more money. And we're not going to let anybody come into our land and take anybody that's foreigner or a stranger or an orphan and widow come in. They're being oppressed. They're not allowed to come in. They're supposed to, during the other 7 years, they're supposed to leave the corners of the field. During the 7th year, the whole field. Anybody can come into it. It's God's way of saying, let's bring some equity back to those who are poor and those who are homeless, those who don't have. Every year they get to come, every 7th year they get to come in and participate and have free access to as much as they need. That's incredible, yes.
I see a couple things with it too. I mean, you're saying it gives equity back to everybody else. It also reminds us that what is ours, what we think is ours, is actually not ours in the first place. It's his.
That's the key.
What I really like to do about this, it invites people to come
Yes.
And then if you're not working that seventh year, what are you doing? You can discuss, you can give other people, spread the word.
Yes. It's allows for...
What makes people invest in food?
Yeah, exactly. It does. See, look what he says here. He says, but in this verse 4, but in the seventh year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not sow your field nor prune your vineyard. What grows of its own accord of your harvest you shall not reap, nor gather the grapes of your untended vine. For it is a year of rest for the land. And the Sabbath produce of the land shall be food for you, your male and female servants, your hired man, and the stranger who dwells within you. For your livestock and the beasts that are in your land, all its produce shall be for food. And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, and the time of the 7th Sabbath of years shall be to you 49 years. Here he goes. I mean, he's laying it all out for them. Yes?
This almost sounds like this is set up that you only pick what you need for that day, kind of like...
Yes.
And you don't pick up for the rest of the week, and then on Friday you pick up...
Twice as much. Right. It's the same thing. They're going back to this, basically saying, you can go back into your property. It's your property, but you can go back into it for that day's necessities. Yes, it did. The land, they didn't give the land their Sabbaths. He says, you know what? It's like the old Midas commercial. You can pay me now, or you can pay me later. One way. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to go into captivity, so the land will get its Sabbaths. He says this. Yeah, the Babylonian captivity, because you didn't give the land its Sabbaths. So the irony is this. You can obey me and do this voluntarily. You can bend the knee voluntarily, or you'll bend the knee by me bending your knee. If you pay now, yeah. And by the way, he tells them, I'm going to give you bumper crops in the year leading up to. So you'll be able to store some away. Don't worry. It's going to be okay. Here's what's fascinating to me. 2 things are fascinating to me about the land of Israel, even today. And that is this, that when Israel is in the land prospers. When those people are there, the land actually gives out its produce. The second thing that's even more fascinating than that is that those who follow the biblical mandates actually have better crops than those who are not following it. They're actually having better crops and bumper crops than those who are not following the biblical mandate. By the way, this congregation, to the tune of about $50 a month, supports a man in Israel who is a vintner. He has two major fields, Gershon, Pharisee. Some of us have been to his vineyards, because here's what happens. It's a hardship for some of the people coming back to the land to actually let their land lie fallow in it's called the Shemitah. Shemitah means the fallow. Okay, so it's called the Shemitah crop. You can't sell the Shemitah crop for produce, for profit. Okay, so it's a Shemitah crop. So because of that, they need help, and so that's why our congregation, as others do, help support farmers in Israel who are trying to observe this commandment, because it is a financial hardship on them because of the economic times in which they live. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Look, in that scenario you're talking about, when they're pushed out, they pull their houses along, they will be on their feet so they don't support outside. God's promise is supporting them because they're being obedient to God's command.
It takes a while. It takes a good rotation for it to be up and running. Yeah, it does. I mean, it's not something that happens quickly. In order for the land to start, when you're taking land, like for instance with Gershon, he took land that was nothing but rocks. He shows pictures of bulldozers. Well, he got a bulldozer and took the top layer off, and then put it in mounds of just rocks, and then had to till that. I mean, so he's taking land that has not been used for a long, long time. For centuries, maybe. You have to irrigate it. You have to clear it from the rocks, turn it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done if you're taking land that hasn't been used in a long time. And actually, the Torah says this: if you plant a new crop, you're not allowed to benefit from it until the 4th year, I think it is, something like the 4th year. So when you plant a fifth year, okay. I was close. Come on. So I was just testing you. I said 4, knowing it was 5, just to see if you'd say no. Okay. So no, it's one of those things. The fifth year. So the fifth, you have to wait 4 years. You plant a tree. So let's say the first year you plant this tree. Well, you've got to wait 4 years, and let's say it's apples. You know, they keep dropping off. Okay, but it's giving nutrients to the soil. So in the fourth year, then fifth year, you're allowed to eat from it. But that takes a while. So that's 5 years. Yeah, because once you get to the seventh year, right, exactly. So you get to have the fifth and the sixth, and then the seventh year you let it lie fallow. So you've got 2 years from the time you planted it. So if you're following this, which some of these guys in Israel are, the Orthodox are following this, you can see why it's rough to get started. Yes, hold on, wait, go ahead. Baruch Hashem. So I want to mention this since you say the corners. Here's Gershon's way of thinking. And I love this way of thinking. He gets the vineyard up and going, the first one, gets the first harvest from it. And what's fascinating is that he then leaves the corners of his field. But because everybody is not used to people leaving the corners of their field, they're used to most people not leaving the corners. When he told people to come and get the grapes from the 4 corners, people looked at him like, what kind of moron are you from? What planet are you from? So they wouldn't even come. This is how bad it was. Here he was trying to be obedient. They wouldn't even come. So the next year he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. And I like this. He bottled up the wine from the 4 corners, put it in cases, and stood on the streets and gave it away to people. And he says to them, here's what he said to us. And he was very humbling. He says, if they won't come to my corners, I'll take my corners to them. And I thought to myself, wow. Yeah, I mean, what an incredible individual. If they won't come to my corners, then I'll take my corners to them. And I thought, that's very humbling. That he would take that approach. Larry, you got a question? Yes, there were. And he talks about that in Deuteronomy 31. You're going to take over this stuff that you didn't plant. And you're going to dwell in houses that you didn't build and vineyards that you didn't plant. So be thankful for what you have. But anybody planting something new, then there's rules for the new stuff. Now look what he says. Look at verse 18. Verse 18, chapter 25. So you shall observe my statutes and keep my judgments and perform them, and you will dwell in the land in safety. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and dwell there in safety. Verse 20. And if you say, okay, they're thinking, what shall we eat in the 7th year, since we shall not sow nor gather in our produce? Then I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, and it will bring forth produce enough for 3 years. I'll give you a bumper crop. And you shall sow in the 8th year and eat old produce until the 9th year. Until its produce comes in, you shall eat of the old harvest. If you'll trust me, I'll bless you in that 6th year and give you enough to last for the 7th year that you let it lie fallow, and then for the next year when you're going to have to replant it. Anybody know what the 3 major crops in Israel are today? Bananas? No. Pomegranates? Grapes. Those 3. Pomegranates, bananas, the little short bananas, the little miniature bananas. They're everywhere. In the north, you go there, the bananas are everywhere. And the banana crop has become huge there. Pomegranates, grapes. The Golan Heights is full of vineyards, full of grapes. Okay, so Israel is a big, big grape producing and wine producing country. Yes? No. Other than a few handful of people, most of them are not. Most of them are just continuing to go. And here's what's interesting. So Gershon showed us a picture. I found this fascinating. He showed us a picture of there was these fields, and I think they were banana fields. And he was showing us how that these individuals had not observed the Shemitah year, and how their bananas turned black. They froze. Here's what was funny. Not funny, ha-ha, but you had a field that the bananas had gone bad, a field where the bananas had gone bad, another field, and he shows us this aerial picture, and then right in the middle is one that was good, and then there was bad, bad, bad. I mean, all around it was bad. There was one that was good, and that was a person that was observing the Shemitah year. It was like God saying, I'm going to honor the person that will honor me. How does that work when it's all the land around them, and yet the one that's observing? And Gershon said that he was having bumper crops. He showed us. He said, I'm having bumper crops, observing what God has told me to do. Here's an Orthodox man just trying to do the right thing. Probably not. Yeah, this is the blessing of God. That's my point. One of the reasons, let me say it this way. I'm saying this for myself as well as for all of us. The reason we don't get blessed is because we're not obedient, and we haven't tapped into the promises of God. If we will do what He says, He will bless us. He's proven that over and over again. If my people will do, then they will bless. I will bless if you will do what I ask. Now, we move, yes?
Well, there's another big step of faith there, because produce does not keep forever. Unless you're very good at counting how you can bananas. But for that stuff to last, this is a sabbatical year, and then the next year, and plus the stuff that the 6 years you stored, for that to last, that's a miracle in itself, because that kind of fruit is not last.
Well, some fruit you can dry. Some fruit you can dry. And you can use, for instance, grapes obviously go to raisins, and then you can have certain things that kind of go to. Right. Right. You can sell it to other people coming through caravans, so it's not all going to be consumed, but you'll have them. Yeah. Yeah.
But same time, if you're going out and you take in money to go back from it, all the everything's foul at that point. There's going to be some.
It's when you start it. It's not every year. It's everyone. If everyone started a vineyard at the exact same time, you started when the exact time it's declining. I know the way Val said. You started the year after.
No, it has to go. Everybody has to be on the same cycle. No matter when you start it, you have to let it lie fallow. The whole land at the same time. Yeah, the whole land has to go fallow at the same time. Because if not, it wouldn't make any sense, because then you'd have everybody, you just have all this rotation. So they really wouldn't be suffering, or not suffering, but the point is that if they're doing it, if they're not, they wouldn't have faith, because they would have to. And that's his point, is rely upon me for the blessing in the 6th year. I'm going to give everybody a blessing in the 6th year that observes this. Whether it's, everything follows that rotation. Everything has to follow that rotation, no matter what food product. Yes. Exactly. It's a miracle. Yeah, why on that day, if they gather twice as much on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, doesn't last. Gather twice as much on a Friday afternoon, it lasts through the Sabbath. It's a miracle. Yes. They believe. Yeah, they believe that they're on the right cycle, and that they've figured out the cycle, that they believe they have. So I think we just went through one about, I think we're coming up to one in about 2 years. Yeah. Yeah, and for instance, the etrogs that we get for our lulavs and etrogs, what festivals? I just went blank. Sukkot, thank you. It'll say on there, Shemitah crop sometimes, which means that they can sell it for observance of a festival, but I can't eat it for. They're allowed to sell it halakhically from the Orthodox. They're allowed to sell it for the purposes of observance, but not for the purposes of eating it, like my salad. I can't put it on my salad. Okay, so the next section of 25. Next section of 25 talks about debt slavery. Debt slavery. Take the second sheet I've given you on your handout. The second sheet I've given you on your handout. At the top of the page, here are some Torah commands. I've listed out 7 of them regarding slavery or servanthood. Here, I'll give you one, Dill. You didn't get one? Okay. All right. Number 1. The slave was not supposed to work on the Sabbath. Number 1. Number 2. And this is big. This is huge. Unlike other nations, Israel should not extradite runaway slaves from other nations. That was big. Because other nations had treaties with each other in which if there were runaway slaves and they went to this other nation, these nations would have extradition treaties and get them back. But here was the point. When they got them back, they killed them. Almost every one of the treaties says this. When we get them back, thank you for giving them back to us. Why? Because we're going to make an example of you. So that anybody else that thinks they can run away, we're going to get you back. Whatever country you run to will give you back to us. And when we get you back, we will make an example of you by having you killed. So Israel was supposed to be a safe haven, a place where runaway slaves could go and not be extradited. Number 3, slaves must not go away empty-handed, but with enough to sustain themselves. You're not just allowed to say, oh, this is your last day as a slave, see you later. Off you go. No, you have to provide for them. Number 4, slaves bought or born to a priest may eat his portion. Number 5, no slave was to be treated in ruthless fashion. You can read the text there. Number 6, here's a big one. No physical abuse of slaves was tolerated. You can't physically abuse them. They're still a human being. And number 7, slaves released after 6 years. So they're supposed to be released after 6 years. Okay, now, go with me to chapter 26. Leviticus chapter 26, we're going to read through this. This is a great text. If we knew Leviticus 26, I think it would help on so many fronts in understanding a lot of texts. He says this, verse 1 of Leviticus 26, you shall not make idols for yourselves. Neither a carved image nor a sacred pillar shall you rear up for yourselves. Nor shall you set up engraved stones in your land to bow down to it, for I am the Lord your God. Okay? Sounds familiar? It sounds like the 10 Commandments, right? Here we go. How is it when God reiterates the commandments, they start sounding like the 10? I don't get it. Maybe those 10 are very important. Because what do you know? Number 2, verse 2. You shall keep my Sabbaths. Does that sound like the 10 Commandments? And reverence my sanctuary. So the Sabbath and the sanctuary are connected. Sabbath, 7th day. Sanctuary, creation, 7 days. They're connected. And reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Verse 3. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and perform them, then I will give your rain in its season. The land shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall last till the time of vintage, and the vintage shall last till the time of the sowing. There you go. Everything's going to be fine. Verse 5. It should be verse 6. Finishing verse 5. You shall eat your bread to the full and dwell in your land safely. I will give peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none will make you afraid. I will rid the land of evil beasts, and the sword will not go through your land. You will chase your enemies, and they shall fall by the sword before you. Verse 8. 5 of you shall chase 1,000, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. Your enemies shall fall by the sword before you. For I will look on you favorably and make you fruitful, multiply you, and confirm my covenant with you. It's always about covenant. You shall eat the old harvest and clear out the old because of the new. I will set my tabernacle among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that you should not be their slaves. I have broken the bands of your yoke and made you walk upright. Okay, so here's this. I want to do good things for you. But here's the key. In order for me to do good things for you, I got one thing I want you to do for me. Keep my commandments. That's going to be the criteria. Then he says this in verse 14. But if you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, and if you despise my statutes, or if your soul abhors my judgments, so that you do not perform all my commandments, but break my covenant, I will also do this to you. Now here's what he's going to do to them if they don't do it. This turns out to be a bigger list. He says, I will even appoint terror over you, wasting disease and fever, which shall consume the eyes and cause sorrow of heart. And you shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you, and you shall be defeated by your enemies. Those who hate you shall reign over you, and you shall flee when no one pursues you. The wicked flee when no one pursues. You know what that's called? The wicked flee when no one pursues. When you're fleeing and no one's pursuing, it's called paranoia. If you're running and nobody's chasing you, look at verse 18. And after all this, if you do not obey me, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. I will break the pride of your power. I will make your heavens like iron and your earth like bronze. Try to plant that. And your strength shall be spent in vain, for your land shall not yield its produce, nor shall the trees of the land yield their fruit. If the ground is like bronze, you're not cutting it up. Verse 21, then if you walk contrary to me and are not willing to obey me, I will bring on you 7 times more plagues according to your sins. I will also send wild beasts among you, which shall rob you of your children, destroy your livestock, and make you few in number. We read that earlier. And your highways shall be desolate. Verse 23. And if by these things you are not reformed by me, but walk contrary to me, then I will walk contrary to you, and I will punish you yet 7 times for your sins. And I will bring a sword against you that will execute the vengeance of the covenant. When you are gathered together within your cities, I will send pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy. When I have cut off your supply of bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven, and they shall bring back your bread by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. Verse 27. And after all this, if you do not obey me, but walk contrary to me, then I also will walk contrary to you in fury. And I, even I, will chastise you 7 times for your sins. You shall eat the flesh of your sons, and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters. That happened. They went to cannibalism later on. That couldn't happen, right? Could never happen in Israel. Well, what if there's no food? And then there's no more food. And you're besieged. And no longer is there any food left. I mean, it's a pretty desperate time when you're eating your own children. But it happened. He says this in verse 30. I will destroy your high places, cut down your incense altars, and cast your carcasses on the lifeless forms of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. I will lay your cities waste and bring your sanctuaries to desolation. I will not smell the fragrance of your sweet aromas. By the way, look at that. Look at this. I will lay your cities to waste and bring your sanctuaries to desolation. This is starting to get eschatological. We'll talk about that. But look at this. Look at verse 33. This is eschatological. And look what happens. I will scatter you among the nations and draw out a sword after you. He says, your land shall be desolate and your cities waste. Then the land shall enjoy its sabbaths as long as it lies desolate and you are in your enemy's land. Then the land shall rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. As long as it lies desolate, it shall rest. For the time it did not rest on your Sabbaths when you dwelt in it. Now look, we're continuing. And for those of you who are left, I will send faintness into their hearts in the lands of their enemies. The sound of a shaken leaf shall cause them to flee. They shall flee as though fleeing from a sword, and they shall fall when no one pursues. They shall stumble over one another as it were before a sword when no one pursues. And you shall have no power to stand before your enemies. You shall perish among the nations, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And those of you who are left shall waste away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands. Also in their fathers' iniquities, which are with them, they shall waste away. Verse 40. But if they confess their iniquity, and the iniquity of their fathers, with their unfaithfulness in which they were unfaithful to me, and that they also have walked contrary to me, and that I have also walked contrary to them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if their uncircumcised hearts are humbled, and they accept their guilt. Now look at this. Then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham, I will remember. I will remember the land. The land shall also shall be left empty by them, and will enjoy its Sabbaths while it lies desolate without them. They will accept their guilt because they despised my judgments, and because their soul abhorred my statutes. Yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, nor shall I abhor them, to utterly destroy them, and break my covenant with them. That's eschatological. For I am the Lord their God. But for their sake, I will remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. Listen to what he says again. Yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, nor shall I abhor them, to utterly destroy them and break my covenant with them. For I am the Lord their God. But for their sake I will remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. In other words, he's saying, look, no matter where they're scattered, no matter how far flung they go, I'm not going to forget the covenant that I made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will always save and redeem a remnant. And ultimately, he'll bring that remnant back to the land, he tells us later on. So this is Leviticus talking about eschatology and telling us what's going to happen. In a sense, it kind of lays it out. If you follow Leviticus 26, you kind of see the progression of Israel's sins and where they headed. Every one of the things that he said would happen, if they didn't do what he said, happened. Every one of them. And yet he brought them back. And he's continuing to bring them back today. Here you and I are living in the time period where after 2 millennia, Israel is a state again. Now, it's not a righteous state, not by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, we were mentioning this earlier, there's only a very small handful of people living in the land that really are desirous of being obedient to God's commandments. Most of them don't see it as the promised land. Most of them don't see a need to be obedient to God. So it's a difficult place, and it's a difficult time. But there are a handful of people there, a handful, that do want to do the right thing, that do want to be obedient to God. So we live in interesting times. You and I have seen the reestablishment of a state of Israel. But he said he would do it. He said he would be faithful to these people even when they were unfaithful to him. And the progression of Israel's history, as you follow Leviticus 26, everything he said that would happen to them because of their unbelief and because of their disobedience happened. Had they been willing to be obedient, he would have blessed them, as he says. Yes. Yeah. And here's what's interesting. The land belongs to God first. Then it belongs to them because he gave it to them. But they're required to give it back to him every 7th year to show that they're giving it back to him. And since they didn't want to do that, he dispersed them. The land wasn't getting its Sabbaths. So I'll disperse you amongst the nations, and then the land will get its Sabbaths. When you come back, you still have to be obedient. Yes. The lifting up his face. Yes. Yes, I will turn towards you. May the Lord bless you and turn his face towards you. That's his blessing. Yes. Yep. Fear God and keep his commandments. Yep. Why? Because he understands that without that, there's no blessing. In fact, you bring curses. And the curses are really God's way of saying, these are the punishments we say curses, but it's really the punishments that come for disobedience. There is a high cost to this disobedience. Yep, I think you're right. I mean, you see that in Israel. If you will be obedient to me, you'll live safely in the land. If you're not obedient, you won't live safely. God is faithful to his promises. And he's still faithful. Here's the beauty of it all. He's still faithful in the end of it all, even though there's only a very small handful and a very small remnant that are faithful. He's still going to accomplish his purposes, even with that faithful small remnant. He's still accomplishing his will. But it's for you and I to know the will of God, and for you and I to know the commandments of God so that we can do them. That's our responsibility, to know what God has said and then to do what he has said. If we go against his commands, we bring judgment on ourselves, we bring judgment on our own land. Questions or comments? 25 and 26 are fascinating texts. So much and so packed. But these blessings and these curses, here's what I'll do for you if you'll be obedient. Here's what's going to happen to you if you're disobedient. Both. I'll bless you if you're obedient. Yes?
There's a verse in today's reading that says, "To proclaim liberty throughout all the land, and to all the inhabitants." You know where that is?
Is it on the Liberty Bell? The Liberty Bell. Okay. Interesting. Okay. It's on the... Interesting. Which is talking about the release of these captives in the 7th year. And the Torah said you had to show grace and kindness to these people that were being released. So I want to go back to what we were saying earlier, though, how the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath, was preparing us for the 7th Sabbath. Letting our land rest every 7th day was a preparation to letting our land rest every 7th year. And observing once a year the 49 days from Passover to Shavuot was a preparation for the 50th year. Everything God asks us to do has a purpose and a plan, and sometimes he gives us these little mini rehearsals to get us up and running and to get our minds thinking in that direction and to get us moving in the right directions for the inevitability of the bigger picture. So every 7th day, stop working, because you know what? There's going to be a 7th year when you stop working. Once a year for 49 days, you're going to count 49 days. And then there's going to be this time in the 50th year when you will bring release of the captives. There's 2 types of Goel. The word Goel means redeemer. There's Goel Ha-Adam, the blood redeemer. And then there's the Goel here in this chapter, which is the Goel who redeems by buying back. By buying back our debt. Turns out Yeshua does both. He's a redeemer of our debt and a blood redeemer as well. All right. Yes. Which again is about harvesting and Boaz is a redeemer. Yeah, and this is all connected to the covenant with David. So, yes. Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think there has to be some judgment against the nations that push Israel or push anybody to divide this up and to separate and take away from Israel what God has given them. So, I would think that would set you up for judgment. That's my own, I would kind of see it the same way. Not a good place to be. Anyone else?
I think kind of go back to what you're saying about the mini rehearsals
Yeah.
and how the calendar and the appointed times are all rehearsals.
They're all rehearsals.
In so many ways, on Thursday, went to the appreciation that they had sandwiches. And I was, never used to do this, I used to do seafood and eat it. But now I'm thinking, oh, what am I eating? And so I ordered a sandwich and there's a piece of meat in there I couldn't recognize. Not uncommon. And so we checked to make sure it wasn't pork. Well, one of the guys at the table goes, well, what a sacrifice to idols, what are you worried about? And I looked at him and I said, well, if you're careful with the little decisions, the bigger ones are easier.
Mm-hmm.
So even that's a rehearsal.
Yep.
Even eating.
Everything is leading us to something even more and bigger. If we're faithful in the little things, yeah, it makes observance of the bigger things that much more easy. If you've rehearsed and rehearsed, then when the final curtain goes up for opening night, it's not a big deal. You're already ready. If you're prepared, no fear. Why should there be? Unprepared, unrehearsed, there should be a lot of trepidation. But I want to get back to this statement here, and that is, we can't call upon the promises of God and pray for God's hand in these promises if we don't know them. You have to know what God has promised in order to pray for what God has promised. This is my point with Elisha. What did he do? He applied Leviticus 26 to his situation. These youths are mocking him in his prophetic office, and he applies Leviticus 26 and says, God promised that this would happen if this situation were met. God, I think they've met the criteria. And he calls down the curse to God. He asks God to do it. Now, God could have rejected it and said, sorry, criteria not met. Request denied. Okay. But the fact that the request was answered, because there's no way, humanly speaking, that I can force two she-bears to do what I want. Yeah. That's a big. So the fact that they go after 42 of them, catch the number. I mean, they must have had to chase a few of them down. Because I can't believe they all stood still and just let it happen. Oh, it won't happen to me when I'm running. Well, they can chase you down. Oh, I got last story here real quick. One of the few times in my life that I've been really, really, what I would call, really afraid. I mean, there's those times in your life where I was talking with a friend one time, and he was talking about being out on the open sea in 100-foot swells, where the boat is taking you up, the water's taking you up like this, and just slamming you back down, 100 feet at a time. And I said, well, did you ever think that you were going to die? He said, well, I thought if my boat doesn't hold up, I'm going to die. Okay, fair enough. I don't want to be in 100-foot swells. I don't know about the rest of you, but I could care less about that type of situation. However, I was in Alaska, having lived there. We hiked back into the woods, and we were dip net fishing in what's called the Chitna River. You ever been to Chitna River? Okay. Very mountain-fed river, very cold. Found that out by falling into it. Not a good idea. You go to hypothermia pretty quick if you don't get out of it. Thankfully, I was pulled out of it. We're dip net fishing, and we're keeping the fish in the water so that they stay fresh after we've caught them, after we've caught them with a dip net. But we're down, the water is, obviously water seeks the lowest spot. We're down, and because we've hiked in on the trail, and then we had to go down through some brush, quite a bit of brush, to the water. For about meat of the woods right there. Well, we only had handguns with us, and one or two rifles, but mostly handguns. And we could hear on the ridge above us, we could hear bears. They were tracking us. They walked us all the way out. Escorts. Well, they knew we had fish. They could smell the fish. And so we have what they want. So they're following us on the ridge, and we could hear them. And every now and then you'd hear a limb snap. You'd hear the... And you think, oh, man, if they ever decide to rush down that hill, first of all, they got momentum. First of all, they're fast. Second of all, they've got momentum. So it was one of the few times in my life that I thought, boy, I really hope they don't come through the woods. And we had already made the decision as a group that if they do come through, leave the fish and run. Don't try to carry the fish. Feed the bears. That's one time you feed the bears with fish.